All right, so we'll just start by introducing ourselves. My name is Erin Millar. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Indiegraf. Indiegraf is a platform that supports startup and small media outlets. We launched in 2020 and have since helped over 80 small publishers launch and grow in communities that really need journalism. Before that, I was a journalist turned CEO founder of Discourse Media, which is a small local outlet that started in BC and has since grown into a small chain of 7 publishers delivering in-depth news in British Columbia, and then have made this transition to now support other news entrepreneurs. So it's an absolute pleasure to be here and moderating a conversation with these two award-winning founders. So I'll pass it to you guys to introduce yourselves, but I do want to just start by congratulating you both. For those of you who weren't at the Lion Awards last night, which was super inspiring, Kara and John both won, I think, 3 awards each, is that right? And were recognized for not only their journalistic impact, but how they support their teams, building great businesses. So these really are the 2 people we want to be hearing from this morning. So, yeah.
Thank you so much. I'm John Adams, founder and editor-in-chief of Montana Free Press. Before that, I was Capitol Bureau Chief at the Great Falls Tribune, which is owned by Gannett. Prior to that, I was a staff reporter for the Missoula Independent. We got some Indy alums in the room, which was bought by Lee Enterprises and shut down a few years ago. So I founded the Montana Free Press in 2016, and I'm excited to talk about my journey from journalist to CEO.
Kind of similar background. My name is Kara Myberg-Guzman. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Santa Cruz Local. We're a small 3-person newsroom in Santa Cruz, California. Co-founded it in 2019. Prior to that, I was the managing editor of the Santa Cruz Sentinel, our daily paper of record. It was an Alden-owned paper. Let's just say I'm much happier now and feel like I'm in the right place.
Thanks so much. So we'd love just to get a sense of who's in the room. So just by a show of hands or stand up, who identifies as a journalist? Okay. Who identifies as a CEO? Okay. Who's confused about what their job should be right now? Yeah, okay. Well, we're gonna start there. So I just wanna invite Kara, if you can start, can you just tell us a little bit more about the origin story of Santa Cruz Local, and
Sure.
why you made that transition?
Sure. It was kind of whirlwind, to be honest. I left the Sentinel in 2018. Like I alluded to, it was a very just difficult place to work. I was pouring my heart and soul into the paper, trying to, keep it alive, and it was just soul draining. The day after I left, my co-founder, Stephen Baxter, who was a reporter while I was there, reached out to me. He had since left the industry. He reached out to me on Twitter. I hadn't talked to him in years and was like, let's start our own thing. And I was like, okay, let's do it. And I went full bore, started working full time on this seed of an idea right away. I had no idea that there were hundreds of similar organizations all across the country. I had no idea that that Lion was out there. I had no seed money, just had what we had, in our own pockets, and just started, researching, asking people, interviewing people, like other founders, and just trying to figure out what the field was like. We started publishing by January of 2019, and then launched our membership model in August of 2019. Had really fast growth during the pandemic, and now we're a small newsroom, operating budget of about $300K, 3 full-time staff, and I just feel like we're well on our way to sustainability.
Congratulations, John.
Yeah, that's exciting to hear. It's fun to meet so many people at different stages of the evolution of starting and running, whether it's a nonprofit or for-profit, an independent newsroom in their community or in their state. Um, Similar story. I worked for the Gannett-owned Great Falls Tribune. I was the Capitol Bureau Chief. I covered state government and politics. And in 2015, we had another round of reorganization, creating the newsroom of the future. And it was pretty clear to me that there was no future for my kind of reporting in that newsroom of the future. And so, given the choice of applying for a new job than the one that I had already had, or being laid off, I chose to not apply for a new job. And so I was laid off in 2015 with a meager little severance package from Gannett. Thanks, Gannett. But that gave me a little bit of a runway. My then girlfriend, now wife, was going to physical therapy school. So she was in a university town a few hours away from where we lived. And so I just decided to throw all of my eggs into one basket. And so I literally moved out of my house, put everything into storage, and couch surfed for about 8 months to cut my expenses to the bare bone while I conceived of and started the Montana Free Press. We incorporated in February 2016. It was a very bumpy road, in part for some of the reasons that we're going to talk about. I didn't really know how to balance all aspects of the job, from being a journalist, a web designer, a fundraiser, an editor, everything that went into getting it off the ground. It was a rocky start for the first couple of years. The Institute for Nonprofit News was a fiscal sponsor, so we were able to take donations, but they just weren't coming in fast enough. And so in 2016, late in 2016, I stepped away from it, and I went and followed my girlfriend to Wisconsin, my home state, where she was doing a clinical residency in Madison. While there, I worked for a nonprofit, an environmental nonprofit, as a communications director. And that experience was really the thing that gave me some of the missing pieces that I didn't have as a journalist. They gave me that nonprofit business experience, a look at a high functioning 40 or 50-year-old nonprofit. And so I learned things about CRM and CMS and all the acronym soup that makes up the back end of our businesses. But I actually learned how to what a member actually was and meant, and how to cultivate membership and how to do that work. So when I came back in 2017 and relaunched the Montana Free Press in 2017, I had much more of the infrastructure in place. And so in 2018, a documentary film that featured some of my work, as well as the founding of the Montana Free Press, Dark Money, premiered at Sundance, of all things. And then the attention that film brought to Montana Free Press, I was in a place to actually capitalize on it. I had things in place that could take that attention and convert it into revenue, and take that revenue and convert it into product. And that was the big start of my journey from journalist to CEO.
Thank you. I think one thing that would be great just to start is I'd love to hear what you guys consider your job descriptions. Like, what are the pillars of your job as CEO, and how is that different than journalist?
Honestly, I feel like I'm at a point where I still wear a lot of hats, but when it comes down to it, I'm accountable for the viability of the organization. So that has to be my number one priority above all things, is making sure there's money in the bank, making sure the employees are happy and healthy and have the support they need, and making sure we're still producing great work at the same time. I'm really I feel like the sustainability of the organization has to be my top concern.
I love that. So setting the vision, holding accountable for the vision for impact, and making sure the resources are there to deliver on that: money, people, and that it's all done in a healthy, sustainable way. Yeah. John, would you add anything to that?
Yeah, I guess the one thing that I would say is that it kind of changes over time. You know, as you grow and add capacity, your role, or my experience was that my role is continually shifting. The primary role is to set the vision for the organization, where we're going, and setting editorial standards. That's one of the reasons why I kind of hang on to that editor-in-chief title, something that I eventually hope to give up. But you know, at this stage of the game, because of the work that I did as a journalist, that identity is still very much part of the organization, and so I continue to enforce editorial standards and occasionally, say, I want this story. But primarily, my job, 75% of my job, I would say, is fundraising and organizational goal setting.
Fundraising and goal setting. I love that. I want to go back and dig into a little bit more to the founding stories, because both of you mentioned that you guys started this, you know, with such a clear view of the need and just wanting to do it with very little seed funding. And I think, are there aspiring people who are founders in this room who are like thinking about doing it? Yeah. Okay. So let's talk about money then. How much money did you have? How did you get it? What was your first kind of like break? How did you manage that first seed in those first months?
I'd like to really just encourage the aspiring founders that you can do this. You already have the skills you need. Don't be intimidated, because I literally had no idea what I was doing when I on day one. I didn't even know that there were other, independent newsrooms out there, so you've already got a step on where I was. I started, my initial thought was, okay, if I'm gonna start this newsroom, I have to have money, I have to have a significant amount of seed capital. So I went around and was asking all the usual donors in my community, hey, I know that local journalism is important to you. You've seen what's happening to the local paper. This is what I want to do. Can you help out? And I just kept striking out over and over and over. And I was doing that for 2 to 3 months. So we had nothing besides what we had in our own pockets. I spent down about $10,000 from my retirement savings account. I don't necessarily recommend that. That's what I did. I sold my car to get some living expenses to live off of. I had the privilege that my husband had a steady job. I knew I wasn't going to go hungry. I felt like I could take a lot of risks. It was a good time for me to do this. But yeah, it took about $10,000 and that spent, this not including what I needed to live off of, but that was for filing fees, a computer, which I didn't have, recording equipment for our podcasts. Those are probably the biggest expenses. And yeah, my co-founder, Steven, was still working full-time in another job. So that's how he was able to sort of make it work for him. He worked on Santa Cruz Local in his free time. But yeah, I mean, I feel like I had the great privilege that I had the time to do it. I had, a sort of security net to do it. I don't think it's necessarily, I wouldn't recommend it. I don't think it's fair. I feel like there is way more support now than there was in 2019. But yeah, I just feel very lucky that I was able to do that. And it is possible. You don't really need tons of money to get it going.
You said a lot of things that I was over here nodding and kind of laughing to myself because it sounded so familiar. But I also would not recommend, putting all your things in storage, moving out of your house, living out of your truck, and surfing on people's couches, although it can be done. I would say, one of the reasons why just felt so honored, to win Business of the Year last night for Montana Free Press was because when I started, I didn't have a clue what I was doing. I didn't have a real business plan. I didn't have sort of a proposition that I was pitching to donors successfully. I wasn't, the one big donor that I had hoped would be the person who would write that $10,000 check that would get us off and running. The check that came didn't cover, a third of the credit card debt that I had racked up, just putting the initial pieces of the Free Press together. So it was a huge mistake, and quite frankly, Montana Free Press almost didn't exist because of that. And again, like you said, there were some resources around when Montana Free Press was getting going, but they were nascent. They were early stage. Certainly not the support community, and certainly not the interest from funders that there is today. And I think the awareness of the general public, and the philanthropic community in general has come a long way in the last few years to understand how critical this work is to democracy. And that's a point that I make over and over and over again, is that there is a connection between the decline of journalism, community journalism, and the erosion of our democratic institutions. That's a pitch that you can make now. And people, it's not a difficult sell. I saw it happening, but other people hadn't seen it yet. And so what I would urge, to not repeat the mistakes that I made, was to have a very clear vision of what it is that you're proposing to do with your news organization, your independent news organization, and stand up for it and pitch it hard and raise that money, as much of that money as you can, before you launch. Don't be in a situation where you're dipping into credit cards or savings or retirement to pay, what you need to survive. I don't think that's healthy, and it risks early burnout. And we've seen it all over the country, where independent news organizations start. There's a tremendous amount of interest in the quality of work that they're producing, but they don't have sustainability, and it leads to burnout, and then they're gone. And that's a real shame. So I guess I would definitely urge everybody to, put the time in to raise the capital. I don't think you need 2 years runway, like some people used to say. You need to raise 2 years. If you try to raise that, you'll spend 2 years raising money and never get anywhere. Raise enough money. I would say my recommendation would be 3 to 6 months. That gets you a little bit of a lead, so you can start producing the kind of work that's going to attract more attention from donors, from members, or from, if it is a for-profit model. I can't speak to that because I don't have a lot of experience there. There's plenty of folks in this room who have that experience that you should reach out to.
Yeah, I just want to build on that a little bit too, because both of you guys are very gracious in saying don't do what we did, but the reality is that, and the Lion Oasis research really made this clear, was that most of these outlets are starting with people's personal savings, right? And I mean, that just blows me away when I think about it. And it was the same story with the Discourse. Like, we were a bunch of freelancers who got together and pooled our freelance fees, and gave each other just enough money that, we all had pulled the same amount of money every month just to cover our fees, and used every extra dollar to try to get the Discourse off the ground. That was our first way to finance it, was freelancing. And so I do want to call that out, because I do think it's an incredible contribution that founders are making. Like, all of these individuals, hundreds of them in communities, stepping forward with their own savings to save democracy. Like, thank you, all of you. Courageous. But the reality of that also is that if the only people who can become, Santa Cruz Local and Montana Free Press are the people who have access to financial security, then we're going to build an ecosystem that looks quite a lot like the one that we are seeking to change, right? And so I do think that the funding is really important. So I do need to plug one Indiegraf thing now, which is that last week we were able to launch the News Startup Fund with the support of the Knight Foundation, GNI, and McConnell Family Foundation, which is a $3.5 million fund that will make those $10,000 checks up, hopefully more than that too, up to 50 grand, 100 grand, for people who need to access that capital to get things off the ground. So Yes, they're starting. You're right. The funders are starting to see it. It's so exciting. And we need to just like keep telling these stories and keep attracting that capital so that we can assure that the next generation has access to starting these things and can actually be equitable, that what we're doing. So with that, we've talked a lot. Well, I actually really want to make sure that the audience, we'd love just to respond to your questions. So please come and line up here, and we'll get to them as you guys have questions. But before that, I'll ask you guys one more question. So I love what you said, Kara, that like you have what you need. I think being a journalist is actually really good experience for entrepreneurship. Do you want to just talk about some of the skills that like you feel like you had that you brought to the table?
I'm thinking of Philip Smith right now,
Yeah.
who is sort of like an informal advisor in our first year. And just the really great advice I got was, as a journalist, you already know how to ask tough questions. You know how to, I would think you'd know how to ask for help and find the resources that you need. You also have a sort of natural skepticism. So apply that sort of skepticism to your own business idea and like plan. And start out small, test an idea, learn lessons from it, measure what works, and just keep building on it. Keep like testing, thinking, trying to poke holes in the idea. And it's all really just about like, for us, it was about, trying to figure out our sort of the way that people move through our funnel, like from visiting our website, signing up for our newsletter, getting more and more sort of touches from us, and eventually becoming members. Like figuring out how our sort of membership machine worked through a lot of just testing and experimentation.
Yeah. It's absolutely true that, you know, if you're a good journalist, you can make a good CEO. You have the skills, as Kara said. You know, I think a big part of the transition is you do have to take on a new identity. You know, if you identify as a journalist and that's who you are first and foremost, it makes it really difficult to be an entrepreneur in a lot of ways. You know, the journalism instincts can sometimes get in the way of entrepreneurial instincts. And, you know, I, for one, really struggled to sort of let go of the reporter part of my job. And the longer I held on to that, the harder it was, the harder everything was. They really are just different jobs. And while the skills of a journalist translate well to the CEO position, you can't do them both at the same time effectively. I mean, it's just, at the end of the day, that's just a fact. People told me that, and I didn't listen for a lot of years. And it wasn't until I actually sort of shed that part of my identity and said, look, what I really want to be doing is investigating and holding the bastards accountable. But what I really need to be doing if Montana Free Press is going to be sustainable and thrive into the future is to let that go and build an organization that enables other journalists to pick up that mantle. And so I set the standards and I built the business around that ideal of what it meant to be a journalist to me. But all of my effort now is focused on making sure that it's sustainable, that we can pay reporters wages that I was never going to make in my lifetime, that we can give the kind of benefits and create the kind of workplace that people want to work at, you know, for year after year, that we're not dealing with constant turnover and attrition because people can't make a living wage, can't own a home. I'm really proud that 5 Montana Free Press employees have purchased homes in the last 2 years.
That's huge.
I did not ever see any opportunity for that for myself when I was a reporter. So I think, you know, if that's a turning point. Shed the journalist, shed that part of your identity, embrace the entrepreneur business part of your identity, and you'll be a lot more successful.
That's really familiar to me. People at parties ask me what I do now, and I'm like, I used to write articles for a living. Now I write pitch decks so other people can write articles for a living. Is there any questions from the audience? Yeah.
Morning. My name's Vicki Collins, and I am from Denver, and I'm the publisher of Bucket List Community Cafe. And we were lucky to get a Lions sustainability audit. And so we've been implementing the suggestions or kind of expectations that we need. And one of the big ones at the end, which I'm daunted by tackling, is create a business plan. So what do your business plans look like? Do you have like written down business plans, and what do they look like?
I think that's a great question very tactical to dig into, because that's one of those things that I think need to be demystified a little bit. Like, there's not some secret formula of, this 10, 12-page document that you have to be considered a real business person, But yeah, why don't you guys share? Do you have a business plan? What does it look like?
Yeah, our first business plan, it's kind of funny to look back on it because there were a lot of assumptions that were wrong. But that's the thing about a plan, right? It's a starting point. It's when you set out on a road trip, you have a plan that you're going to get from here to here, and these are all the places you're going to go. But along the way, you're going to, there's going to be construction you didn't see. There's, you're going to get a flat tire, whatever it might be. Things change, plans change. But the goal is the destination, right? So my advice would be with a business plan. First of all, there are people in this room who have business plans that are probably similar to the type of business that you're looking to build. Build relationships with folks in the industry and borrow their plan. That's one of the things that I really love about this community is it's an extremely collaborative community. People want to lift other people up. We all believe in this mission. We all believe in this work that we are doing, and we are eager to help those who want to do this work too. So you don't have to start from scratch, first of all. And second of all, it is just a plan, and plans can change, and you can adjust it as you go. But having that vision, taking the time to spell it out, what does your revenue model look like? How many people do you intend to serve? What's the need for this product that you want to produce? Putting that in paper and reorganizing it as necessary or changing it as necessary, I think it's just important to get going. Just start it.
I agree. Similar to John, I wouldn't sort of belabor the business plan. I wouldn't stress out too much about it. Like, looking back now on our business plan, the reality of where we are in year 3 is completely different from what I expected when we founded. I would say talk to Philip Smith, who actually teaches how to build a business plan. There's like a lean template, like a one-page template that I think is really useful to, just think about where the money is going to come from, how it's going to work, and just think about how are you going to be accountable for that. There are lots of resources out there. I'm on the board of the Tiny News Collective. It's a nonprofit that provides tools to help entrepreneurs get newsrooms off the ground, and there's training through that. All sorts, and Lion too has a lot of great resources on the GNI playbook has actual introductions to how to think about starting the business. So yeah, I'd really lean on the Lion community and look at the sort of all the writing that's already out there.
Another question?
Ability at Maryland. Both of you talked about how hard it was to raise that seed capital. Dick Toffel talks about how hard it is to sell a vision versus reality. What was the moment after you got launched where it was real enough that people who said no started to say maybe?
For us, it's a really long story, so I'm going to try to make it really short. The bottom line is there was a funder who did not fund us the first time around. They thought that looking at the work of Montana Free Press, because it focused on politics, because it focused on accountability journalism, they were afraid it was too political. And so they didn't want to fund something that they weren't sure of if we had a bent, if we were one of these organizations that was pushing a particular agenda. And, you know, in the environment at the time in our state, I think that was a fair hesitation on their part. The proof of the quality of the work over the course of the preceding year, combined with the fact that we got some funding from some other institutional funders. One of the things that happens very quickly is when you get funding, particularly if it's local funding from a local institution that is known in your community, in your state, that lends legitimacy to your organization. And what you end up seeing is that a cascading effect of funders seeing, you know, they don't want to be left off the wall of organizations that are supporting this great work. So one thing that I would really urge is be transparent about your funding. And I would urge you to put it front and center. You know, it helps with your credibility, not only with readers by being transparent about where the resources that fuel your organization comes from, but it also creates social proof that enables more funders to come looking in your direction. And, you know, some folks will look at it and they say, oh, well, those organizations they're getting funding from everybody. Well, part of that is because they're A, doing good work, and B, they're doing work. They're doing the work to get that capital so that they can continue to grow that organization. And so money kind of follows money once you make that first leap.
Yeah, I think that's really great advice, and I totally agree. I think that for us, again, I spent so much time wasted, you know, thinking about like building this like business plan, going to donors, like showing them the business plan, like doing all these pitches. When finally I asked Neil Chase at Berkeley Side for advice, and he's like, stop wasting time, just get something out there, like build a sort of test idea, like the minimum viable product, and just get it out there, see what people like, see if people like it. So we started with a survey, asking people what they need, like what kind of news do you need, how do you want it delivered, and started with a sort of pilot podcast on what happened last night in Santa Cruz City Council. It was just like a 5-minute wrap up. And just started like publishing, getting stuff out there. Oh, I would form like an actual LLC or incorporate as a business before you start publications. Big tip. Yeah, once we did that for about 8 months, just, you know, like sort of tweaking the podcast, like realized we needed a newsletter to go out with it so we could, you know, get people, get their contact info and build an actual relationship with them. So yeah, we had about 8 months of just like occasional publication before we launched a membership model. We made a big deal out of membership, like sent our very small couple hundred subscriber newsletter list, like a bunch of emails about membership, and like did a podcast series about who we were and why we wanted to start Santa Cruz Local. And in that first initial membership drive, we were able to get something like 150 members and 40K in like 2 weeks or so. So yeah, I feel like really just having the proof of like, here's what we do, this is why we do it, really helped us, yeah, get over that hurdle and build credibility and like have people really understand what I was trying to convey in the business plan and all the pitch decks.
Yeah, that's awesome, version. Congratulations. Yeah. I would just add one thing to that too, and I think this was one of my learnings about, I mean, the big difference for me about journalism to CEO is that like now your job is sales, whether it's fundraising or recruitment or whatever, right? It's like it is a sales-based discipline, and you, and when and that means running a funnel and getting a lot of no's for every yes. And the first time that I ran some kind, that I was trying to fundraise, it was like so many no's, and every no just like deeply wounded me. And now I'm like, yeah, I just have this Buddhist approach to fundraising where I'm like, yeah, that was another no, that means I'm one step closer to the next yes, but just like having some distance from it, and knowing that like, okay, I'm gonna do this and trying to do it efficiently, and like there's nothing worse than a mushy maybe. Like no is way better than mushy maybe. Just getting to those yeses faster, and just thinking about that as a discipline itself, I think, not my own personal identity with every yes or no. All right, let's have another question here.
Now I lost the question because that was so intriguing to me. Every no sucks my soul out. But anyway,
Not you.
I'm Joe Coughlin. I'm from suburban Chicago. We have like a hyperlocal community site. And I'm just curious, can you talk a little bit about early hiring, when you knew it was the right time, and the process for that you went through?
Ooh, that's a great question. It turns out that the technology and the money is easy compared to the people, right? We are complicated machines. Talk to us about your first hire.
Yeah, hiring, I would say, is probably the most important thing that you will do as a CEO. Those first few hires are so critical because they set the course for the organization. My philosophy towards hiring was always hire the best person that applies, regardless of experience. There's a lot of things that goes into it, but I want the most talented person who's going to bring their passion to the organization, and that is a really, I think, really critical thing for a small startup. Is you have to surround yourself with people. They may not believe in what you're doing to the extent that you do. They may not share all of your vision and all of your passion, but they have to be willing to pull in the same direction. The first hire, I was fortunate that I had a donor say, well, how much do you need to hire a reporter? And I threw out a number, and she wrote me a check, basically. And that was, so I immediately went to work hiring my first reporter. So that was my first hire, was a reporter. And that got us through the first legislative session. We did really, really good work in that session. We went from being nobody in 2017 and most of 2018, that in 2019, Montana Free Press had the largest newsroom presence at the state capitol. And it was a risk, right? Because there wasn't enough money there. Yes, I had this check, but that money was going to run out if I didn't go and raise a bunch more, but at least got me over that initial hump of hiring. But the biggest thing I would say about hiring is, you'll know when the time is right, when you feel like you've got enough capital that you can take that leap, because that capacity is going to enable you to do the work that you're trying to sell to donors. If you don't have something to show donors, they're not going to, or investors or advertisers or whomever, you've got nothing. So, don't wait too long, but, make sure that you've got enough to pay that person for a few months at the very least, and pay yourself. And also make sure that you're hiring people who truly believe in what you're doing.
I agree with that 100%. It's really about the person rather than their experience, I think, necessarily. You don't need to hire like the fanciest editor with like the, amazing resume. It's about hiring people who share your vision and are willing to, and have the passion, like share the same passions. We're 3 years in, and we still don't have a we don't have a staff reporter at all. Our first hires were in the business development and community engagement realm. So we have 3 full-time staff, including myself and my co-founder, Stephen Baxter, who's the editor. Natalia Drescher is here at the summit. She's our first hire. When she actually reached out to me because she was a fan of the podcast, and we got to know each other. She was wanting to break into journalism, and I just knew that we were I knew right away that she was would be an amazing asset to our team. It was maybe 6 or 7 months in, and we still didn't have enough money to actually hire her. So we got her position, her part-time couple-hour-a-week position, paid for through a internship program at our community college. Her role was completely covered for a couple of months through that, and then as we started to grow capital, grow our revenue, we were able to add more and more hours to her role, and she eventually became full-time. So we kind of like scrapped to make it work. But yeah, her role is community engagement, so building a relationship with our audience, really understanding what they need from our news, and that informs our journalism. It's also really been a huge advantage on our membership side. I feel like that's the big reason why our membership program has been so successful, because like we are very intentional and we've like put the staffing behind building a relationship with our community. We also have a fourth part-time staff person who has a very similar role, just working with Spanish speakers in our community. Her whole entire role is to ask Spanish speakers what kind of information do they need and how they want it delivered. And that's going to inform a new product that we're building for Spanish speakers.
Awesome.
Hi, I'm Carrie Pauling. I'm with northcentralpa.com. We cover about a 12-county region, a huge geographic area in north central Pennsylvania. This kind of springboards from that original question of how you work your HR, because once you start to hire a bunch of people, now you've got all these personalities and you have all these potential issues. So we're actually looking to outsource our HR. Is that something that you have done, or how do you handle HR issues?
I would not outsource HR. I feel like the employee management and sort of like thinking about how your workflows work and just like getting a sense of like where our employees at sort of mentally, emotionally, and just like where they're at with the work, because it's such heavy, intense work, is just really something I want to have a close, ties to. And that is a big part of what we do, and I feel like why we've been successful is because we've been able to just make sure the team feels cared for. But yeah, I feel like that's a huge responsibility as the leader of an organization, is to make sure your team is working well.
I think another thing too is I do think it changes as you scale. Like when I was at Discourse, and we had our team was completely, our HR was all very relationship based, up till a point where I could no longer manage like the individual relationships. And it's like, for us, it was somewhere between like 15 and 20 people on our team. Discourse has a whole other leadership now. But at Indiegraf, there was, because we launched during a pandemic and we're not geographic, like our team is remote and across the country, across Canada, the States. We actually have someone in Brazil and in Mexico, and our team has grown to be 23 in 2 years. We needed expertise to help with that. And we didn't have the skills, like my co-founder and I didn't have the skills to be able to be really intentional about our culture. And I 100% agree with you that it's like ultimately my responsibility as CEO to create that culture, create that environment. But I needed some policy. I needed an HR system. So we didn't outsource it, but we brought a consultant in who's awesome. I could share that recommendation with you. We set up Bamboo HR, which is really, really helpful if anyone doesn't know what that is. Track your vacation properly, do performance management, there's tools. And they just helped us set up a foundation that now, and she's no longer working with us, but we'll call her in again if we need her at some point. But she just set up this amazing foundation so that we have the systems and processes built to check in with people, hear what they need, and make sure that we can respond to that. So yeah, that would be my addition. John, did you want to add anything to that?
I mean, we're somewhere in between those things right now. I mean, we've grown to the point where HR is definitely it's a challenge to do in-house. As the team grows, it becomes more and more of a responsibility. And so we're at a decision point where do we hire somebody to come in and be that person? Or, do we do some kind of hybrid model where we outsource certain things like the vacation tracking and some of that? There are digital tools, online tools that can handle some of that stuff. The policies and, the handbooks, the manuals and everything else and the enforcement of that, we're still managing in-house. But that is a pain point for us right now in our growth, where we're evaluating that as we go. And so I would love to hear more about Bamboo.
I just wanted to add super quickly that we did hire a consultant, like a freelance hourly person, to help us occasionally with like contracts, the handbook, vacation time policies, like that sort of stuff. So yeah, that was totally helpful.
And that's another thing where this community, Lion, INN, there are other organizations, LMA, there are shared resources there along those, and listservs and Slack channels where these kinds of questions, get hashed out amongst peers across the country, which is really helpful.
Annika, I
Hi.
think it might be our last question.
Yeah, I know. We only have a couple minutes left, but I'm Annika. I'm the deputy director at Lion, and we see a lot of, thank you. We see most, honestly, of our members come from a journalism background to launch something, and that makes total sense. They have the passion, they have the drive, and we are starting to see those founders either bring in a co-founder with the business expertise who wants to be a CEO, or step aside and just be the kind of head editor-in-chief while another person becomes a CEO. And so I want to make sure we address that, because it can be a misconception that just because you're the founder, you have to stay the CEO, throughout the rest of the life cycle of the organization. And so I'd love to just briefly hear from each of you about what made you want to stay in that CEO role for people who might be considering, actually, I just want to do the journalism, or I really do want to step into the CEO role, and making sure that that is totally normalized and okay either way.
Yeah, I love that question. I feel like I had an argument, not at this conference, another conference, with somebody who is in the business of supporting entrepreneurs in news, and they were complaining, saying, all of these journalistic founders, all they want to do is the journalism, but what they need to do is these other 25 things over here. And my point was, why do they have to do everything? Like, can't we create infrastructure? Can't we create things that folks are in a position where they can actually really play to their superpowers and be able to access what they need to succeed? So yeah, I definitely think there's lots of different ways to do it. So yeah, that's a great question. Kara, why did you decide to stay in the CEO role?
Honestly, I feel like this is where the innovation is happening and where the exciting stuff.
Yeah.
I'm just like really excited about what's happening in our corner of the industry, and I feel like this is where I can make the most impact. Is I want to figure out the business model and like show the rest of the world, like, look, it can be done, and this is how we did it. I think there's a lot of ways to do it, and it's just like really exciting to me this is just really fun, like thinking about like, it's just more fun and exciting to me, honestly, at this point of my career than, covering city council meetings. I know like that's like really important to me, like the civic education and like that kind of work, but this is just much more, fulfilling, I think.
Yeah, I relate to that a lot. There are days where I love being a CEO, and there are days that I wish I was in the trenches as a journalist. And, I continue to waffle on that. But, conferences like this, where you're putting your head together with, some of the smartest people in the country who are all pulling in the same direction, trying to solve this problem, that is really exciting. But my goal, and, we're at the point in the organization where it's about 6-7 years in, really in earnest, the last 3 years have been, our major growth trajectory. And we're now at the point where we're mature as an organization where we're thinking about things like succession. The Montana Free Press right now, if I know we don't say get hit by a bus, we say win the lottery. If I win the lottery tomorrow and leave Montana Free Press, I do believe that Montana Free Press would survive and would continue to flourish with or without me. I think we do make the mistake to some degree of letting, our founders have too much of a role in, the life or death of the organization. Certainly the founders are going to drive that early growth and early success. But I think the smart founders and the smart organizations and boards or whoever's leading them should be thinking relatively early on about succession and the future of the organization with or without the founder. That's going to be better for everybody, including the founder, who doesn't have that pressure. The more that I can delegate to my deputy director, to my editor, the more I get the board involved, the happier I am, because I'm not being, pulled in a million different directions. I mean, I'm still kind of being pulled in a million different directions. But, the goal is that someday I can step aside and say, you know what, I'm going to follow in the footsteps of some of my peers and mentors around the country who have said, it's time for me to step back as founder and I'm going to pursue something else. And, I think those organizations, including the Texas Tribune, Vermont Digger, they're going to be fine. They're going to be successful. And quite frankly, I think those CEOs, well, actually, I don't know about Evan. It's hard to imagine him not wanting to be in the mix. But I think those CEOs are going to be really happy, and those organizations are going to be really healthy.
Yeah, I agree. What you said, Kara, really resonates with me. Like, it's so fun, right? I'm also completely unemployable at this point. Like, honestly, and I think probably a lot of you are too. But yeah, there's lots of different ways to do it. And there's no question, regardless if you decide to do more of the journalism, more of the CEO work, whatever, that I think what's key is that we're asking ourselves, like, what is the work that fills us with energy and that's exciting? Because it is hard, and there's a lot of, it's hard. There's down points. There's a lot of anxiety that we're carrying as founders. And so to be doing the work that fills us with energy and that we're excited about is like really important, I think, to the long-term sustainability as well. And that may change over time, right? And then asking folks to help and fill in those gaps, whatever they are. We are at time, so I'm going to end by inviting you both to just leave a couple words of wisdom with this group. And one thing that we didn't have a chance to talk about is some of the really hard stuff, right? Like is managing the potential burnout. Like being a founder can be lonely at times, and managing our own mental health is really key. Both of you have been such inspiring CEOs in taking care of your teams and being really so committed to creating a really different kind of work environment. I really admire you both for that. Can you just leave us with one tip for how you take care of yourselves?
I'll actually be covering this in the 11 a.m. session.
Go. That's the tip. Go listen to Kara at 11.
But yeah, I guess the two takeaways is for the aspiring founders, you can do this. Thousands of people around the country are doing this. And secondly, I wish I had addressed mental health earlier. It wasn't until several months in where I was like, oh, this is a problem. I shouldn't be working this many hours a week. And really started thinking of how to address that in workflows. Address mental health, that should be one of your top priorities along with your business plan.
Yeah, and I would say my biggest tip would be to embrace the communities of support that exist throughout this country. It's an incredible network. I've made just tremendous friends literally all over the country in doing this work, and those relationships have really been key to the success of our organization, sharing our successes, our losses, learning from their successes, their losses. Those relationships, I think, will help with the mental health aspect of it, but will also give you will take a lot of the burden off your shoulders of figuring it out all on your own.
Thank you both so much. Thank you all for coming out at 9 a.m.